Good morning, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library, and I'm here for the Awfully Big Adventure book tag. So, this was a tag that was created by Shawn D. Standfast over at his channel. They're getting ready to have a August of Adventure story reading, and he made a tag to go along with it. It's only 5 questions long, but it is a great tag, and I decided since I was tagged, I need to do it. I saw this tag on his channel, and I also saw it on Book Time With Elvis, Mark over at Book Time With Elvis, and so yeah, I was trying to get props for this tag, so I went with my handy-dandy adventurous hat. But then I thought, well, maybe I need to really get adventurous. But then I thought again and remembered that, yeah, I haven't been on very many adventures in my life outside of the United States, so maybe I should do it like this. So, here we go. Here is the Awfully Big Adventure book tag, again, by Shawn D. Standfast. Saw it on his channel, and Mark with Book Time With Elvis. I'll leave the link to their videos down below. So, let's get this adventure started. Question number 1. Do you like your adventure stories fictional or real life? Why? So, I think both gentlemen answered just like I would answer. I like both. I always tell, I have a lot of people ask me, why do you read so many history books? Why do you read nonfiction all the time? To me, nonfiction is an adventure. I think that the real lives of people, you don't have to make stuff up. It's all right there. And why make it up when you can read about real life? And that's always been my opinion on that. But at the same time, I also love to read some good fictional adventure. And, this goes back to, I took a high school geography class, and did some history and civics stuff with a teacher named Mr. Richley. He is, he passed away a few years ago, but I still have a great memory from that man. He, after we would get our stuff done in geography class, we'd get our work done, we could go explore. And he encouraged us to explore. And I always thought that going and living in the outback, hence the beginning of the hat. Well, maybe I should leave it like that. Hence the beginnings of the hat. I thought living in the outback would have been awesome, and we would explore Australia. We would explore, the Southeast Asian islands. And I just thought that was fascinating, all of the stuff that we learned from there. I remember with the islands, we learned about the volcanoes, and we learned about all the tribes that were there. And the thing that really stuck with me, though, that made me become more of a non-adventurer was when I started learning about the wildlife in Southeast Asia and in Australia. And I started learning about how, I believe, if I got my facts right, that part of the world has the largest number of poisonous snakes, the largest number of poisonous spiders, and a wide variety of both of those. Hence the reason I haven't traveled there. So anyway, I like both. I have a pretty good imagination when I'm reading. I like to put myself in the story, and so I love adventure stories, and I don't care if they're real or fiction. So question number 2. If you could follow in the footsteps of any explorer, who would that be and why? And this list was a big list, and being an American history guy, you couldn't help but think about being on the first boat with Columbus. And when I talk about these, I am not saying that when they arrived, some of the stuff that they did to the native peoples, none of that was right. So please don't take it that way. But it would have been fascinating being there at first contact and seeing 2 totally different cultures mesh together, clash, however you want to look at that, clash against each other. And just those first experiences, that would have been pretty awesome to see and experience. I also think about Lewis and Clark when they went on their adventure west. Now, granted, they were exploring. I always use the air quotes for my kids, because how do you discover or explore something where people are already living there? But anyway, and I always do that with Columbus too, and the kids always get to laughing. But it would have been neat to see those cultures meeting each other for the first time, and all the vast differences between them. Just Lewis and Clark being able to see the American West, from the plains all the way to the mountains to the coast and back. That would have been fascinating to me. John Smith, when he arrived at Virginia, and going up the James River and exploring inland, and then he did a lot of other exploring as well. I believe he was on the coast of Maine. He did some stuff over in Europe before he came to America. He did a lot of stuff. And I think of Miles Standish in the Pilgrims when they arrived, and all of the exploring they did in Massachusetts. All of that stuff really fascinates me, and there's been fabulous books in journals by those explorers, and then books later on that were written that they just fascinate me. And I think of Miles Standish and the Pilgrims, and I think about Nathaniel Philbrick's book, The Mayflower. And it's good stuff to read about and learn about. Genghis Khan and his sons and grandsons and all of the exploring, and I say exploring because it was more like conquering, but again, clash of cultures and being able to see all this stuff for the first time and build these empires. I find that stuff fascinating. So anyway, there we go. If I had to pick one, let's go with Lewis and Clark. That would be maybe the one I would want to be on. Probably the safest of all of those. Those other ones might not have been quite as safe. But anyway, number 3. Where was the most romantic and or weirdest place you have read a book? And what was that book? Now, I know Shawn, over on his channel, when he did his video, he is very well traveled, folks. Very well traveled, like world traveled. And he had a whole list of places that he's been. And even Mark had over at Book Time With Elvis, even he had a few pretty interesting places. Me, on the other hand, I haven't traveled anywhere. And so the answer that I came up with right off the get-go was, the most romantic or weirdest place. Well, that's on a deserted island. And there were 8 books there. But I can't tell you what they were yet, because you're going to have to wait for a video with me and Shawn as we discuss living on a deserted island and taking your favorite books. But if we're talking reality, I was thinking, like I said, I haven't been to very many places. But every time we have went on vacation, I've always been reading books. And so I went with the romantic side here first. And my wife and I, when we got married, we did our honeymoon down in South Texas, down at Padre Island. And we have been back to Padre Island and then right across the bay in Port Isabel several times. My father-in-law lives down there now, and we've been down there to visit several times. And I've always had books with me. The ones that popped in my head were, I read Timeline by Michael Crichton down there. I reread it when I was down there. I remember reading that one. I also read, this last spring break, I read a book about the Carlisle football team, the Native American team that started competing early on in college football with all of the big squads, Harvard and Yale and all of them. And I can't remember right off the top of my head the exact name of that book, but I read a book about that. Now, the books weren't very romantic, but the place is romantic to me because that's where I went on my honeymoon. The weirdest place that I have read a book, the bathroom. How disgusting. Everybody does it. Whether it's a book, a magazine, or on your phone, everybody does it. But think about how disgusting that is. That is weird. And I have read all kinds of books, or parts of all kinds of books and magazines and articles on the phone. In the bathroom. That would be my weird one. So anyway, let's move on to number 4. If money was no object, what rare and or signed adventure book, fiction or nonfiction, would you purchase? So I had a couple of them. I had 3 of them in mind. I'm going to pick one over all of them, but I had 3 in mind. I thought it'd be neat to have an original copy of Marco Polo's book Travels signed by him. That would be awesome, and that would be rare. One book that is an adventure story that I would like to have signed but would not be rare, or I imagine it's not rare, is Hatchet by Gary Paulson. Gary Paulson is the epitome of adventure writing for kids, for upper elementary and middle school aged kids. He is fabulous. I highly recommend him to anybody who has not read Gary Paulson, but I would love to have a signed copy of Hatchet. That was my first book when I was in the 6th grade that really got me going on my reading again, because I had different stages in my life where I had to kind of kickstart my reading. But 6th grade, I actually had a teacher read it to us the first time, and then I've read it a couple times since, and she read it out loud during, it was like an advisory period or something, and I love that book. I fell in love with it, so I'd like to have a signed copy. But the number one choice for me, and it was probably one of the very first adventure stories I ever read, it might be the first adventure story that I read, and that was Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. And Robinson Crusoe was stranded on an island, and this is when was that written? The 1600s, I think? Maybe early 1700s? I can't remember exactly when it was written, but I would love to have a signed copy of that. I read that when I was in upper elementary. I read one of those Scholastic, Apple Scholastic books that they provide to classrooms all over the United States in the, those little magazines they hand out that you buy cheap books. Yeah, and I read it in that, and I absolutely fell in love with that. And I have a collection upstairs of different copies of Robinson Crusoe that I have found over the years. Some are old and some are new. Some are from like the 1800s, and some of them are very, very new copies. But I would love to have a copy of that. And then the last question on this is number 5. What place have you read about but never visited? Name a few of your favorite titles. Okay, so I've got a lot of these, and after watching TV like the DIY, or DIY, no, I had it right. DIY, do it yourself channel. Anyway, they've been having the people in Alaska that, they've been building those houses so they can live out in the woods by themselves. And then, there's been other shows on TV that have really promoted Alaska. And my sister-in-law has moved up there. She lives up fairly close to the national park, and I want to go visit. I don't think I want to live there. It's a little too remote for me, but I want to visit it. I think it would be awesome. And the book that came to mind that goes with this is by James Michener. It's a really small book, and it's called Journey. And I just learned a couple minutes ago when I was trying to find the name of the book. I remembered the story that I read. I couldn't remember the name of the book. So I looked up James Michener, and as I found Journey, it said this was actually part of a chapter out of his bigger book, Alaska. And I have not read that one yet, so I need to jump into that one someday. But Journey was good, and it was about some British guys who went across Canada, and they went up the and of course I go blank on the name of the river that heads all the way north to the Arctic, the Mackenzie River, and then they head over into Alaska for the Yukon gold. And it was a really cool story. There's a part in there where they were talking about how cold it gets, and spitting, and it freezes before it hits the ground. I believe that's the book where I read that it was so cold that they warmed up some hot tea, and they went to drink their hot tea, and it shattered their teeth because the temperature changes. So I thought that was pretty cool. But anyway, I want to go. I've never been there, and that's a book that I read that made me want to go there. And then my other one is just the American West. I personally have never traveled farther than the western border of Colorado, and I've only been out that far once. All my other ones have been right at the the beginning of the Rocky Mountains for the most part, so central Colorado. And I have never been farther west than that. And I want to go, I don't want to go live out there, but I want to go visit like California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and, you know, all the states out in the Northwest. And the books that really got me going on this were a couple by Stephen Ambrose, and his book Undaunted Courage. It talks about the Lewis and Clark exploration, and I found that book to be fascinating, really, really good. And then another book he wrote was Nothing Like It in the World, and that was about the Transcontinental Railroad, and it talked about, you know, blasting the railroad through the Sierra Nevadas and through all those mountains and stuff. And I found that all very fascinating, and I would love to go out there and visit and just you know, see the beauty of nature out there. So anyway, that was the last question on this tag, the Awfully Big Adventure book tag. And number 6 is tag some fellow adventurers. All right, and so I am going to tag Mark over at Book Time with Mark, and then I'm going to tag, because I haven't seen a video by them in a while, Scott and Becky over at the Bookish Bryants. So I hope you guys are watching. I hope you do this tag. If you don't get tagged, still feel free. If you like adventures, especially if you've been on adventures, go do this tag. Thank you to Shawn Standfast for tagging me in his original video, and thank you to Mark over at Book Time with Elvis for his video. I enjoyed that. But anyway, until next time, BookTube, I hope you find your next reading adventure. See ya.